السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين ولم يخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم وتقسطوا إليهم إن الله يحب المقسطين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. وصلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Chapter number 60, verse number 8 of the Quran describes the method in which the believers shall conduct their affairs with the non-believers. And this is one of many verses in the Quran. It's important to know, number one, that in the commands of the Quran to the Muslims in their dealings with non-Muslims, there's not just one verse or two verses or three verses as it may seem. Because today when people point the finger at Islam as being an inherently violent religion, they point to one or two verses. They cherry pick and they are selective. The Quran has an entire book or an entire set of verses which are dedicated to the treatment of non-Muslims. So this is one of those verses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that لا ينهاكم الله, God does not forbid you. لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين, in account of those who, or in regards to those who do not fight you on account of your religion, أن تبروهم وتقسطوا إليهم إن الله يحب المقسطين, that you do benevolence towards them, you are good towards them, and you are just and fair and equal towards them, for God loves those who are just. Islam is not an inherently violent religion, nor is any other religion. Christianity is not inherently violent. Judaism is not inherently violent. Other faiths, doctrines, Hinduism, Buddhism, none of them are inherently violent. And what proves this is, in logic, in what they call mantiq, there's a statement. They say لو كان لبان, that if it was there, it would exist. If it existed, then it would be present, you would see it. If Islam was truly a inherently violent religion, you would see it. Now, you pause and say, well, we're seeing it all over the news today. We're living in a certain time, and we need to understand the effects of the cultural and the political and the society context that we live in. But for hundreds of years, more than 1,000 years, Islam and Muslims lived side by side, peacefully, in harmony, with justice and equality and fairness, with adherents of other religions. And just taking a look at the history of where Islam existed throughout the centuries will prove this point. So, where was Islam first introduced? After being spread in the Arabian Peninsula, one of the first places during what they call the conquest, one of the first places was Persia. And Persia, if you study the history of Persia from the time that Islam was introduced there, up until maybe a few hundred years ago, you'd find that it literally took hundreds of years for people in that region to begin to convert to Islam. It took them hundreds of years. They stayed on their previous religions, whatever their religions were. They were Christians, and they were Jews, and they were Zoroastrians, and there were other faiths and other backgrounds. They all remained adherents to their former beliefs until, over a period of time, they began to gradually accept Islam until today there are non-Muslims in that area. but until almost the vast majority of the population accepted Islam. This fact is very hard for people to swallow, because in order for people to gradually accept Islam, there must be a truth to it. See, if people were forcibly converted to Islam, then you can say that there was no truth to Islam and it was forcibly people converted to it under the sword. But if people begin to accept Islam gradually, that must mean that there is some logic, there is some truth behind it, and that's hard for some people to swallow. To admit the fact that Islam has some truth behind it, it's very hard. So they say that it was completely forced upon people by the sword. This is not true. Any area, of course, there are isolated incidents, but even these isolated incidents, when you compare them to the forcible conversion to, for example, Christianity, and how people were forcibly converted to Christianity in South America, in North America, even throughout Europe, throughout Scandinavia, for instance, even in the Middle East, even in Asia, Southeast Asia, in Africa. One man, he was commenting, an African man, he said that when the people who would come and conquer Africa, because Africa, the entire continent, was conquered for a very long time. Europeans went in there, the British, the French, the Italians, the Belgians, the whoever, the Germans, they went into Africa and they cut it piece by piece. He said they would come in, they would bring their soldiers, their mercenaries, to punish people, and on the same ships, or the ships that would come after, they would bring their Bibles, their Bible bashers. So they had the sword and they had the Bible. So when they're conquering at the same time, they're bringing Christianity with them. You will find no parallel in Islamic history, other than very isolated incidents. That is because when Muslims would conquer a land, for the most part, they treated people justly, they treated people with equality and with fairness. And that's why people began to gradually accept the religion of Islam. And this is exactly what the Quran tells us. The Quran tells us that if a person does not fight you on account of your religion, then that should not prevent you from being just and being equal and fair to them. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And there are other parts of the Quran which do not allow forcible conversion, such as the most famous ayah, which is in the Quran. It comes after Ayatul Kursi in Surah Al-Baqarah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, La ikraha fi din, that there is no compulsion in religion. If we look at the Quran says there is no compulsion in religion. So the question is where do we get these apostasy laws from? The laws which say that if a person leaves Islam, that person may enter Islam, but that person may not leave Islam. Or if a person is born into Islam, that person may not leave Islam. That he or she shall be punished, or that person shall be executed. None of this is mentioned in the Quran. This is mentioned in the hadith. But the hadith, of course, is just as binding and just as influential and powerful as the Quran. So, what do we understand from the laws of apostasy, which are very controversial today? People point the finger at Islam and say that, look at how intolerant Islam is. The Quran is saying that there is no compulsion in religion, but look at these apostasy laws that are being carried out across the Islamic world. People are being executed for leaving the religion of Islam. And why does the Quran, and this all ties into one subject, why does the Quran say, for instance, do not befriend the Christians and the Jews? Doesn't the Quran say this in a number of verses? That you shall not befriend the Christians and the Jews? It's important to understand one thing. Context. Context is extremely important. Because anytime we're dealing with laws, anytime we're dealing with Sharia, anytime we're dealing with the interpretation of the Quran, we have to understand that who is this Quran being interpreted by? Who is this hadith being interpreted by? See, the Khawarij, when they fought against Imam Ali alayhi salam, what they wanted to use against him was the Quran. They said that you have no more rules, you have no more authority. Our authority now is the Quran. The Quran will be our judge. So what did the Imam do? The Imam brought a copy of the Quran. He said that, you want the Quran to be your judge? They said yes. He said, okay, talk to the Quran. Talk to the Quran, let it respond. Can the Quran respond if you speak to the Quran right now? The Quran itself cannot speak. The message which he was trying to convey is that the Quran, and this is in line with the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, the teachings of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt, is that the Quran always needs a form of interpretation. Someone who will speak on its behalf. And this is why when the Prophet, before he passed away, many, many times, he said, I have left behind you the Quran and what? The Ahlul Bayt. He says, لَن تَضِلُّوا, you will not go astray, مَا إِن تَمَسَّكْتُمْ بِهِمَا, as long as you hold steadfast to both of them. So saying that the Quran is enough, it won't satisfy. It won't suffice. The Quran by itself needs that which will interpret it. And for us, those who interpret the Quran are those whom in their homes the Quran was revealed to. And that is the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. And this is why the shortest and best route and most efficient route to understanding the Quran is through the words of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. So when it comes to the laws of apostasy, these are taken from the ahadith. It's important again to understand context, because every law that we have today, if you look at our legal corpus, this at one point or another was interpreted by someone. Scholars 200 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 1,200 years ago. Who were these scholars? They were mostly men. They didn't have airplanes in which they can travel from one place to another. And let's face it, they weren't infallible. The Imams of Ahlul Bayt were infallible. But even the scholars, which the Imam said follow these scholars, they were not infallible. They can make mistakes. They were affected by their surroundings. They had not seen what was their outside world. Now, they strived their best to give the most accurate interpretation of the Quran. None of them would ever want to mislead. None of them would ever want to present an interpretation, a verdict which they did not believe was the closest to the truth. This is because the Quran in itself, when it addresses the prophets, when it speaks of the prophets, it says, وَلَوْ تَقَوَّلَ عَلَيْنَا بَعْضَ الْأَقَاوِيلِ لَقَطَعْنَا مِنْهُ الْوَتِينَ لَأَخَذْنَا مِنْهُ بِالْيَمِينِ ثُمَّ لَقَطَعْنَا مِنْهُ الْوَتِينَ. That if this man, Muhammad, صلوا على محمد وآل محمد, was just to attribute some words, some minor words to us. وَلَوْ تَقَوَّلَ عَلَيْنَا بَعْضَ الْأَقَاوِيلِ, the Quran says that we would take him by his right arm, meaning that we would take him by his authority. ثُمَّ لَقَطَعْنَا مِنْهُ الْوَتِينَ, that we would cut off all support, all divine support, if he was to say something which God had not revealed him to say. Now this is the Prophet. So how about the scholars? You can imagine the kind of precaution that the scholars would take in order to produce a verdict, but still they are not infallible people. So they understand law, they understand the Quran in a certain context. And I was just reading something yesterday, which an article was saying that our legal system needs to be rewritten entirely, because it was written by men, and men have misogynistic tendencies. They're inherently biased against women. So when you read about the fiqh of marriage, for instance, they make it seem like the man he's purchasing something. He is giving the dowry in order that he owns something of the woman. If he doesn't own her, he owns the right to this and he owns the right to that. And this is because these men lived in a time where slavery was prevalent. So it was normal to say that I own this person's right. So it needs to be rewritten because it has a certain context. Our fiqh, our jurisprudence doesn't need to be rewritten. Maybe it needs to be re-understood and revisited, but it doesn't need to be rewritten. It's hard to imagine that we would do a better job than, hundreds of years of scholars. But that's something aside. That's anyone can have an opinion in this. So apostasy laws, coming back and understanding them. Why does Islam say do not take friends? Jews and Christians as friends. In some verses it says that you can befriend them, you can be just towards them, you can be equal. And in other verses it says do not befriend them. This brings up the issue of citizenship. See, up until about 100 years ago or 150 years ago, there was no such thing as the nation state. People were allowed to travel freely between lands. Citizenship is something which is fairly new. Up until maybe 100 years ago, there was no such thing as citizenship. You are not a citizen, you are not loyal to a certain country. Now, today, when you are a citizen of a country, you have to pledge your loyalty to that country. If I say one day that I want to renounce my loyalty to the United States of America, we should have cut that off the tape so they don't use it against me. But if supposedly one wants to say that I renounce my citizenship of this country or that country, they'll kick him out, they'll ban him. To be a citizen, you have to be loyal to that country. You have to have a pledge of allegiance to that country. All of this came into existence only a few decades ago. Before that, there was no such thing as being loyal to a country because there were no borders. There were no nation states. And this is why when the Quran speaks about an ummah, it speaks about your loyalty being not towards your tribe, not towards yourself, not towards your family, not towards the ethnicity that you come from, but towards the ummah. Inna hadihi ummatukum ummatan wahida. That this is your nation. So the allegiance was to the nation of Muslims. It's important to understand this. Because the loyalty was to the nation and not to a certain tribe, not to a certain member, whoever was outside of that nation, whoever was outside of that ummah, it is like today, a person who comes from a different citizenship. These verses were revealed at a time where the ummah, the Muslim ummah was forming. And where did it begin to form? In Mecca and then in Medina. But when the Muslims were in Medina, they were more settled. So it was important that they protect themselves. It was important that they were loyal. It was important that they were all loyal to one another, even if they did not share the same religion to one another. And that's why when the Prophet went to Medina, the first thing that he did was he drafted a constitution, which is referred to as Sahifatul Medina, the Constitution of Medina, which said that we are all residents of Medina, we shall be brothers of one another. Doesn't matter what tribe we come from. Doesn't matter what religion we come from. We shall all be loyal to one another. Now these verses, which tell the Muslims not to befriend the Jews and the Christians. First of all, does not say friend. It says, لا تتخذوهم أولياء. Do not take them as awliya. And what does awliya mean? Wali is a person who has authority. When the Prophet says, أَلَسْتُ أَوْلَى بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ مِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ, he is saying, do I not have more authority upon the believers than they have upon themselves? Or when the Quran says, النَّبِيُّ أَوْلَى بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ مِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ, the Quran is saying that the Prophet has more authority on the believers than themselves. So the issue here is authority. Do not befriend them in a way where they have authority, lest you give out the state secrets. Today, there are secrets of the state. They're called state secrets. And a person who understands his state secrets and he goes and gives them to another country, what's his punishment today? Treason. And what's the punishment for treason? Everywhere in the world. It's death. If you take the secrets of the government of the United States of America and you go and give it to Russia, for instance, or you give it to Cuba or North Korea, what happens then? The government reserves the right to execute you. And this is a law which is accepted universally across the entire globe. State secrets are something which is very sensitive. The verses, and this is the point that I'm trying to get at, the verses which were revealed to the Muslims telling them not to befriend the enemy, not to have the enemy have authority over you, is telling them do not befriend them in a way where you will reveal the state secrets. Why? Because one day a young woman came from Mecca to Medina. A slave girl came from Mecca to Medina in order to seek the help of the Muslims. So they clothed her, they feeded her, They fed her and then they sent her back to Mecca. When she was being sent back to Mecca, one of the companions of the Prophet, he knew that a war was about to happen, that the Muslims in Medina were about to go and conquer Mecca once and for all. So what did he do? He took a piece of paper and a pencil and he began to write to his family members and his friends and his tribesmen, the ones that are in Mecca. And he gave the letter to the young woman and he told her, go. At this time, within this context, and remember, we're talking about context. At this time, this was considered an act of treason because she was taking a state secret and she was handing it over to the enemy at the time, the people who were in Mecca. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals that to the Prophet, that you should not take them as friends, as people who will have authority over you. Do not allow your state secrets to be revealed, because what was loyalty at the time, what dictated loyalty was the ummah, the newly established ummah at the time, which included the Muslims. So it's important to understand these laws when it comes to apostasy. Now, how do we draw the parallel between this and apostasy? It could be said that the reason why the laws of apostasy were so harsh was that it was tantamount to treason. Because when you left Islam, when you left this ummah, it is as if a person today leaves his country, he denounces his citizenship, and he goes to war against his own country. This is the mindset, this is the mentality, this is the context which existed at the time, and that's why you see laws of apostasy were so harsh. Now, it would be important at times like this, when we have a nation state and when we are living in nation states, and when there are borders, to revisit these laws. And we should be critical of these laws which exist in our corpus. But throughout time, Islam has always treated non-Muslims fairly and justly. And there are ample examples of that given throughout the history of Islam. For instance, we have a set of covenants, a set of contracts, which were written by the Prophet Muhammad and his successors, his companions which came after him, ensuring the rights of non-Muslims. Every single place that they would go, they would bring with them a covenant which would ensure the right of non-Muslims. One of these places was Palestine. Just one of these places. We have many of these examples. The Prophet wrote covenants to the Christians of Najran in present-day Saudi Arabia. He wrote a covenant to the monks of Mount Sinai around the Sinai Desert. He wrote covenants to the people of Palestine in Palestine. Why? Why did he write covenants to them? These people, the first covenant which was written to the people of Palestine, which was upon the request of the Orthodox Patriarch at the time. He heard that there was this new religion which was being introduced in the Arabian Peninsula, and it is beginning to spread within the Arabian Peninsula. If it spreads, the Arabian Peninsula is not too far from Palestine. So the first thing that he did was he went to the Prophet Muhammad, and he requested that the Prophet write for him a treaty, a covenant, which would secure the rights of the Christians in case the Muslims would come and invade. And that's exactly what the Prophet did. He wrote a covenant, and this monk, this patriarch, he took it back with him. This covenant was rewritten many times. Once during the time of the second Khalifa, Umar ibn al-Khattab, because Jerusalem became a Muslim nation, or it became a Muslim protectorate under the time of the second Khalifa. And when the second Khalifa entered, and when he was given the keys of the main church, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is the most sacred church in Jerusalem to the Christians today, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, he came and he gave the keys to the second Khalifa. He said, this is at your disposal. And he invited them to pray inside. The Khalifa said, no, we won't pray inside. So when they asked him why, he said that, so in the future, when Muslims would come, they would not claim this land as theirs based on the fact that we had prayed in here. And so the Christians were able to keep their church. And until today, if you go to Palestine, the key to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is in the hand of a Muslim family. I asked somebody about this. They said the reason is because there are so many Christian denominations which claim authority in this church that they don't get along with one another. So imagine 5 owners of a house and there's only one key. Who gets to keep the key? So they can't agree among themselves, so they give it to a trustworthy Muslim family who in the morning opens the church doors for them, and at night they lock up and they take the key with them. Until today it is in the hands of the Muslim residents of that area. When Imam Ali alayhi salam became Khalifa, he rewrote another covenant. He rewrote another covenant which would ensure the rights of the Christians. And all of these covenants are written down. And if you revisit these covenants, if you revisit these contracts, you would not find a covenant today by a non-Muslim ruler which ensures the rights of Muslims as this one written by a Muslim ruler which ensures the rights of non-Muslims. You would not find no democracy, no constitution, nothing in the world today offers protection to the Muslims in the same way Muslims offered it to non-Muslims. And Imam Ali alayhi salam stipulated so many conditions that these people are to be respected. They are not to be uprooted from their homes. Their sanctity is not to be violated. The church bells shall continue to ring. Their symbols should not be taken down. They should not be forced to convert from Christianity to Islam. Their nuns and their monks shall be respected. Nobody shall be abused. Imam Ali alayhi salam says a very interesting statement. He says that this, for as long as my rule is here, it will be binding. The rulers which come after me will also this will be binding upon them. He says that there will be people who will not respect these covenants. They would want to destroy Christianity. See, there's a very close link between Islam and Christianity. Islam does not seek the destruction of Christianity at all. Islam, Muslims and Christians are co-workers of one another. This is because although we have our differences, our core beliefs are very similar. They are very identical. If you take a Muslim today and a Christian, a devout Muslim and a devout Christian, and you ask him, what do you believe in? What are your core beliefs? Forget your doctrine, what's written in the book. What do you believe in? Do you believe in pluralism? Both of them will say yes. Do you believe in respect? Yes. Do you believe in honor? Do you believe that a person should not steal or cheat or lie? Both of them will answer yes. So Islam does not contradict Christianity, and Christianity does not contradict Islam. But Imam Ali alayhi salam says in his covenant that there will be people who will not respect this covenant. And there have been at times where people in the name of Islam have tried to harm Christians. Nothing as catastrophic, at least in our time, in what is happening today with ISIS in Syria and in Iraq. You know, some of the churches in Mosul in northern Iraq, for the first time, I read in an article, for the first time in 1600 years, longer than the existence of Islam, for the first time in 1600 years, the church bells stopped ringing. And how long has Islam been in that area for? More than 1,000 years it has been in Mosul. But for the first time, the church bells, they stopped ringing. The crosses were brought down. They were destroyed. The Christians were forced to evacuate their homes. Some of them were giving detailed accounts of what happened to them. They said we were given 12 hours to evacuate. They announced it on the speakers during Salatul Jum'ah that all Christians, and this is the second largest city in Iraq, very populated, all Christians have until Saturday to leave. People who had been living there for hundreds of years, their families have been living there for over 1,000 years, left, completely abandoned. And when they left, they were not allowed to take anything with them. They had to empty out their pockets on the way. All of the jewelry, their phones, their money, their passports, all of that was taken away from them. Is this what the Quran tells us to do to non-Muslims? Is this what the covenants of the Prophet and the successors which came after him, are these the instructions of what to do to the Christians when you meet them? This is not. This is not Islam. This is outside the fold of Islam. And it's very important for people to understand this. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us and them security and success and prosperity. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to create a society which is just and equal and harmonious. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to send His blessings upon us and forgive us for our shortcomings. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك قاضي الحاجات إنك على كل شيء قدير برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.